3.4 million years ago, Earth was a savage stage, forged in tooth and claw, where the forest's darkness swallowed life's fragile flame. In the heart of this green purgatory, a figure crawled, not on two, but on all fours. A primal echo of a past evolution strove to forget. The rustle of dry leaves under her paws, the damp scent of earth, and the chilling whisper of wind through the treetops were the sole companions on a desperate journey. She, a female Homo habilis, whom time had nearly erased, was about to stumble upon a secret that could rewrite the very history of her species. A lost link, agonizing in the shadows, a silent scream that would pierce millennia to haunt us. The dawn air was thick and cold, laden with the acrid scent of damp earth and the sickly sweet smell of fallen, rotting fruits. The sun was still a distant promise, a pale and ineffective smear trying to assert itself through the dense canopy, and the gloom of the equatorial African forest enveloped everything in an almost palpable shroud of mystery. Hunger was a constant companion in those primeval eras, a shadow dancing in the corners of her vision, whispering promises of succulent meat and sweet fruits, a visceral need that propelled her every movement. Every muscle in her lean body was tense, ready for flight or fight, her primal instincts boiling. Fear, a primordial and visceral emotion, tightened her chest like a suffocating knot. Where were the others? Her mate? Kaya? Her small, vulnerable, and dependent offspring? The forest responded only with its indifferent whisper, with the chilling breeze that seemed to mock her distress, a derisive sound in the silence, broken only by her own pounding heartbeats. Lyra stopped, her snout to the ground, sniffing the air desperately. The strange scent was stronger now, mixed with something she knew well, the musk of large predators, the dense and threatening odor of ancient lions, hyenas, and wolves. But it was not the familiar scent of any of these known creatures. There was something more, a sharp and unpleasant component that made Lyra's nostrils flare in repulsion, a smell of decay and of something unnatural. She moved cautiously towards the source, driven by an uncontrollable need to understand, to find answers, to perhaps reunite with those she loved, despite the growing fear. With each step, the tension increased, the air felt heavier, and the forest silence, once subtle, now seemed almost deafening, punctuated only by the accelerated and frantic beating of her own heart, which echoed in her ears like a war drum. But today, hunger was more than an inconvenience. It was a bone-chilling terror, an ominous foreboding that twisted her stomach into a knot of panic. But a damp, almost gurgling noise, coming from a clearing ahead. It was a sound that felt unclean, laden with a darkness Lyra had never associated with untouched nature. She hid behind a colossal tree trunk, covered in thick moss, her small, agile body perfectly merging with the shadow. She peeked out, her eyes wide with terror, and what she saw made her blood run cold, a primal horror seizing her senses, paralyzing her momentarily. In the center of the clearing, there were no slaughtered animals, no signs of a successful hunt, not even the remnants of a predator's feast. Instead, there was an irregular circle of black stones, strangely arranged, some stained with a dark, viscous liquid that looked like blood, but did not have the familiar scent of animal blood. And beside them, an object, which at first glance seemed like a twisted, shapeless log, an inert piece of the forest, but which, upon closer inspection, revealed the unmistakable form of a living being, completely motionless and horribly mutilated. A deep, chilling shiver ran down Lyra's spine, making her tremble uncontrollably, unable to tear her gaze away. The nauseating smell was stronger now, almost suffocating, mingling with the stench of putrefaction. It was a smell of decay, and of something unnatural, something that defied the order of the world she knew, an abomination. What was happening in that forgotten corner of the world? What had caused her pack to vanish, and what was that dark circle and the inert body in the clearing? The mystery deepened, and Lyra knew she was on the verge of a terrible discovery. A truth that would forever change her perception of that wild and seemingly familiar world, opening her eyes to a horror she never imagined could exist. Her small pack had vanished. There were no familiar paw prints in the mud, no known scent of her companions on the damp morning wind, only the vacuum of a deafening absence that left her disoriented and utterly alone. She searched for hours on end, her almond-shaped eyes scrutinizing every shadow that stretched under the trees, every colossal tree trunk that might conceal. Almond-shaped eyes, scrutinizing every shadow that stretched under the trees, every colossal tree trunk that might conceal. A sign her ears attuned to every snapping twig, every rustling leaf that might indicate the presence of her loved ones. The scent of fresh blood, which would normally guide her to freshly killed prey or the trail of a successful hunt by her family, was not in the air. Instead, there was a different odor, heavy, metallic, almost sickly. It was a scent she didn't recognize, a strange and pungent chemical aroma that instinctively repelled her yet, at the same time, drew her with a morbid and irresistible curiosity. It was the smell of something that did not belong in that wild environment, something that disrupted the natural and ancient order of the forest. Gigantic trees, with their gnarled trunks and twisted branches, stood like silent sentinels of a forgotten time, their damp leaves dripping the nightly dew onto the soft forest floor. Sounds were subtle yet constant, a primal orchestra of life and death. The rhythmic rustle of dry leaves on their light steps, the distant melancholic croaking of bullfrogs hidden by stream banks, the unmistakable hum of nocturnal insects preparing for the day, and the almost imperceptible murmur of a stream winding its way through exposed roots, a constant undertone in the landscape. Amidst this ancient symphony, a figure moved with surprising agility, creeping, almost gliding between gnarled roots and dense shrubs, her lithe, muscular body merging with the shadows, a phantom in her own land. It was she, Lyra, a female Homo habilis with her equally developed front and hind limbs, moving on all fours with a dexterity that seemed to defy her own species, a vestige of a past still very present in her anatomy and instincts. Lyra was starving. She crawled under a dense canopy of giant ferns, their damp leaves brushing against her fur, her eyes scanning the terrain with feline agility, every sense on high alert. Suddenly, a sound. Not the innocent snap of a branch under an animal's feet, nor the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. The scent, previously strange and unsettling, now revealed itself in its full, horrifying pungency, a stench of death that suffocated the air and assaulted Lyra's nostrils with an indescribable intensity. It was the odor of death, yes, but not the familiar death of a hunted prey, a gazelle torn apart by a lion, or a body peacefully returning to the earth in its natural cycle. Her almond-shaped eyes, adapted to the forest's gloom, focused on the distorted, grotesque form. It was a sound that seemed to tear the veil of the forest, laden with pain, despair, and an unknown savagery, a lament that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. She cowered, her muscles tense and aching, ready to flee at any moment, to dissolve into the shadows if necessary. But curiosity, stronger than primal fear, held her captive to the spot, fascinated and horrified by the scene. As her eyes scanned the grotesque body, she noticed something peculiar in the creature's hand. Clutched in its long, rigid fingers, distorted by death, was an object. It was not a common stone, nor a broken branch. It was smooth, polished, and reflected the scant light filtering through the tree canopy with a subtle and strange, almost supernatural glow. Lyra, driven by an inexplicable force, by a need for knowledge she barely understood, cautiously extended her forepaw and touched the object. It was cold, and a strange chilling sensation ran through her body, like an electric shock that left her momentarily paralyzed. She tugged at it, and the creature's jaw came loose with a dry snap. revealing teeth that were too large, too pointed, and of a strange color for any primate Lyra knew. Teeth that seemed made for crushing bones. And then she understood, and the understanding was a cruel blow that made her tremble. On it, Lyra discerned engravings, lines and dots that repeated in a complex and enigmatic pattern, figures that seemed to tell a forgotten story. She had never seen anything like it. Members of her species communicated through grunts and gestures, through touches and scents, through an instinctive and limited body language. This was something beyond, something that spoke of a different, perhaps superior intelligence, of knowledge that would transcend oral communication, a legacy from immemorial time. As Lyra examined the bone with morbid fascination, a low, scraping sound came from the thick foliage behind the inert body. She froze, her senses on high alert, every hair on her body bristling. It was not the wind, nor the movement of a small, innocent animal. It was a deliberate, heavy sound, the dragging of something large and dangerous, approaching slowly. Her body trembled uncontrollably, and her eyes widened in terror. An atavistic fear, deeper than any predation she had ever faced, overwhelmed her. She knew she was not alone in the clearing. The creature that had killed the strange being was nearby, watching her, perhaps stalking her from the shadows, hungry and relentless. What was it, and what did it want? Lyra clutched the bone tightly in her paw, feeling its strange weight and the coldness of the material, and, with an agile and desperate leap, disappeared into the dense forest, her heart pounding uncontrollably in her chest, while the distant howl resonated again, closer now and more menacing than ever, a premonition of her imminent pursuit and an uncertain fate. It was not a twisted log, nor any ordinary animal. It was a creature, yes, but unlike anything Lyra had ever seen in her wild life. It was large, disproportionate, with long, thin limbs that seemed broken at strange and painful angles, and skin of a pale, sickly hue, almost cadaverous, which contrasted horrifyingly with the dark stains of coagulated blood. What shocked her, however, was the skull. Large, with a prominent protrusion at the back, and with the remnants of dark, matted hair caked with some kind of dry, hardened mud. Her wide eyes caught even more disturbing details. Deep, irregular wounds on its body, as if it had been torn apart by something with sharp claws, but not those of a known predator, neither lion nor ancient wolf. Dark, clotted blood adorned the ground around the body, forming a viscous pool that mixed with the earth and dead leaves, exuding a terrible and unforgettable stench. There was a metallic, rancid note, a pungent chemical quality Lyra had never encountered, something that seemed to emanate from a nightmare, from a dimension alien to her reality. She crept along the edge of the clearing, her movements slow and hesitant, every fiber of her being alerted to the imminent danger, her muscles taut and ready for flight. The sun, now a pale and ineffective blotch through the dense tree canopy, barely illuminated the macabre scene, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like threatening specters. The temperature had dropped even further, and the icy shiver that ran through her came not just from the morning chill, but from the freezing terror that settled in her chest, paralyzing her and making her heart pound uncontrollably. The forest sounds seemed muffled, as if the very environment was in shock, in reverent silence, bearing witness to the unspeakable act unfolding in that obscure corner. Lyra approached the object that lay motionless in the center of the circle of black stones. A sharp howl, from a creature Lyra could not identify, cut through the air in the distance, making her shiver and cower further. The object was a type of bone, crudely but undeniably crafted, with polished edges and smooth surfaces, as if it had been sculpted by ancestral hands. The scent of fear was almost palpable, an acrid, metallic odor that mingled with the damp smell of earth and the rancid smell of blood on the tip of her snout, an olfactory symphony of horror. Lyra sprinted through the forest, her 4 agile limbs propelling her through the tangle of gnarled roots and treacherous vines that seemed to want to ensnare her, making the escape a dangerous dance. For an instant, despair overwhelmed her. An icy wave of panic washed over her. She was trapped. She stopped, gasping and trembling, at the bottom of a small ravine, a natural ditch opening in the earth. The sound of the creature was loud now, just above her, its growl echoing off the rocky walls, reverberating and amplifying the terror. She peeked up and saw it. A dark, misshapen form with bright, hungry eyes, looming on the ravine's edge like a macabre gargoyle, a demon from the past. Its body was hunched, with long arms that dragged on the ground, ending in sharp claws, and a head that seemed disproportionately large, almost fused with its neck, without any hint of lips, just a torn, tooth-filled maw. Its teeth were long and pointed, exposed in a sinister snarl. It was not a predator Lyra recognized. It was not a creature of her world, of her time. And then, a peculiar sound echoed from the creature's mouth, a dry, almost mechanical click, followed by a pale, ethereal glow emanating from somewhere within its body, a cold, artificial light. Lyra felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold of the ravine, a chill that came from her soul. That thing, it was not natural. It was not an animal. It was something more, something that defied the very essence of life. And it was about to jump, to launch itself upon her, to end her existence, to plunge her into eternal darkness. The creature's growl was closer now, and Lyra could smell its strong, rancid odor, mixed with the sweet smell of decomposition and something that seemed electric, almost metallic, a smell that nauseated her. With a sudden surge of courage, a spark of her resilient and indomitable nature, she pushed forward, her limbs slipping in the wet, slippery mud. She heard a loud snap, a dry, frightening sound, followed by a searing pain in her left hind paw. A broken branch, or perhaps something else, had injured her, tearing her flesh and exposing the bone, a deep and painful wound. She limped, the rhythm of her escape broken by the excruciating pain, but adrenaline kept her moving, an indomitable driving force that prevented her from giving up. The bone, firmly clutched in one of her forepaws, bounced against her chest with each leap, a strange and cumbersome weight. But the image of her offspring and her mate, Kaya, perhaps still alive, lost somewhere in that savage forest, was a beacon of hope that kept her from yielding, from surrendering to despair and darkness. She needed to find them, needed to warn them of the threat, needed to understand what was happening on that fateful day that would change her life forever. She forced herself to run faster, ignoring the cry of her wounded body, each step an agony. The forest began to change. The density of the vegetation gave way to sporadic clearings, and the ground became rockier, with sharp stones and treacherous fissures. A familiar sound, the distant, thundering roar of a colossal waterfall, echoed in the air, a promise of refuge or perdition, a sound that could mask her footsteps or guide her to the abyss. She was approaching the edge of her territory, a place her pack rarely visited, considered dangerous because of its treacherous precipices and turbulent waters. It was a place to hide or to die, a boundary between the known and the unknown abyss, but one she refused to let go of, as if it were a vital talisman. The sound of heavy, scraping footsteps, a dragging of claws and hooves over the ground, came from behind, growing closer and closer, making the air vibrate and the dry leaves crackle under the creature's weight. The creature, whatever it was in relentless pursuit, determined to catch her. The forest, once a safe and familiar refuge, now transformed into a suffocating labyrinth of shadows and dangers. Sharp branches lashed at her face, leaving painful scratches that opened and bled, while damp leaves and spiderwebs clung to her fur, hindering her vision and breathing. The creature, larger and less agile, could not follow her immediately, its grotesque body impeded by the narrowness of the passage. She heard the dull, heavy thud of its body against the rock, followed by a frustrated and furious growl that echoed through the crevice, making the earth tremble. This gave her a few precious seconds, a brief respite from the relentless pursuit, a moment to plan her next move. She dared not look back, but the image of the strange dead creature in the clearing with its hideous wounds and nauseating smell was etched into her mind. A constant reminder of the danger that stalked her, a memory that would haunt her forever. What could cause such devastation? And why was it pursuing her with such obstinacy and fury? The answer, she knew, would not be good. It carried a foreboding of darkness and doom for her species. She squeezed between colossal tree trunks, leaped over muddy, slippery streams, and slid down steep, moss-covered slopes, all in a desperate and frantic attempt to evade her pursuer, to escape the shadow of death. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, oxygen seeming scarce in that dense and oppressive environment, as if the air itself was being stolen from her. Terror propelled her, a raw primal force that suppressed pain and exhaustion, pushing her beyond her limits, beyond what she thought possible. The howls, once distant and melancholic, were now hoarse growls, almost breathing down her neck, a guttural and menacing sound that indicated the proximity of danger, the imminence of an attack. Lyra turned sharply, squeezing through a narrow crevice between two colossal rocks, covered in moss and ivy, almost invisible in the gloom, a small refuge amidst the pursuit. She emerged from the crevice into an area of dense undergrowth, almost falling into a hidden hole beneath the leaves and vines. The pain was a fire racing through her veins, a constant burning that threatened to fell her. Lyra threw herself down a steep, rocky incline, rolling over sharp stones and exposed roots, the pain in her paw exploding in her mind like 1,000 incandescent needles. The smell of damp earth and stale moss filled the cave air, a dense, claustrophobic odor, mingled with the iron tang of fear that still lingered in Lyra, a suffocating cloud that enveloped her, making even breathing difficult. The newly discovered emerald green stone pulsed in her paws, a source of subtle warmth and disturbing visions that still echoed in her mind like a vivid nightmare. Images of gigantic trees, much larger than any she knew of, rushing rivers and an endless savanna, where strange and magnificent creatures grazed peacefully, mingled with flashes of darkness of a threat, moving in the shadows of red, hungry eyes that seemed to watch her from an abyssal void. The sun had risen considerably, now filtering in golden ephemeral rays through the dense tree canopy, illuminating the shadows and revealing the path. Not the creature's guttural growl, but a whisper, a faint, familiar call that seemed to come from an almost unbearable distance, yet filled Lyra with desperate hope, a flame that ignited in her heart. Lyra's heart leaped violently in her chest, a mix of hope and terror, joy and dread. It was a roar that came from the depths of her soul, a war cry against injustice and cruelty. She lunged forward, not thinking of her own safety, only of protecting what remained of her family, a primal instinct that drove her with an irresistible and unquestionable force. The creature slowly turned, and Lyra could see the mechanical glow again, emanating from an aperture in its chest, a pale, cold light, almost extraterrestrial, that contrasted horrifyingly with the darkness of the forest. It was the same light she had seen in the cave, on the bone, in the stone. The creature was what the stone had shown her in her visions, an entity that came from the shadows, that had pursued her species for ages, a threat that would transcend time, whose sole purpose seemed to annihilate any trace of progress, any spark of evolution, any chance for Homo habilis to become something more. It was her pack. Kaya's voice, perhaps? Or the faint cries of her offspring. The creature, with a quick, clumsy movement, extended one of its claws towards him, ready for the final blow, to cut down another innocent life. Lyra acted without thinking, driven by unconditional maternal love and a savage fury that consumed her. With a desperate roar, she threw herself against the creature, biting and scratching with all her might, her teeth and claws tearing at the creature's gray, sticky skin, smelling its nauseating, repulsive odor. She felt the touch of its cold, clammy, almost inhuman skin, as if touching death itself. The creature hissed, a shrill, disgusting sound, letting go of the offspring, and shoved Lyra with brutal force, sending her flying. She fell, rolling, the pain in her paw exploding in her mind, leaving her momentarily stunned and disoriented. But as she rolled, her eyes landed on Kaya's mutilated body, and beside him, a fragment of bone he always carried in his pouch, identical to hers, with the same enigmatic engravings. Lyra understood. The creature was not a common animal predator, but a hunter of something far deeper and more terrifying. And what it hunted was not its prey, nor its flesh, but knowledge itself, the lost link, the fragments of memory and wisdom that her species held in its beginnings, the very essence of its evolution. And her pack had been sacrificed for it, a terrible and cruel price for the evolution to come, a massacre without mercy. She darted towards the sound, ignoring the searing pain in her injured paw, driven by a primal, uncontrollable instinct of protection and maternal love. With each step, the call grew clearer, and the familiar scent of her family, mixed with blood and fear, intensified, assaulting her nostrils with a horrible pungency, a smell of massacre. She emerged into a clearing, and the scene that unfolded before her eyes shattered her world into a million pieces, transforming into a living, palpable nightmare, an image that would haunt her forever. But the light did not dissipate the sense of imminent danger that permeated the air, a dark premonition. She followed the course of a small stream, the cold, bubbling water muffling the sounds of her own steps and her ragged breathing, a soothing melody amidst the chaos of her thoughts. The creature's scent was still in the air, faint but present, a subtle trail indicating it was not far, that the pursuit had not ended, that the hunt continued. With each step, Lyra felt the pain in her wounded paw, that the image of her offspring and the hope of finding them alive propelled her, a beacon in her darkness, a reason to continue. And most disturbing of all, the image of beings like her, but walking upright, manipulating complex tools, building things Lyra couldn't comprehend, glimpses of a distant and grand future, a path the creature seemed determined to block. The creature outside, Lyra knew, was what the stone showed her, an entity from the shadows, from an unknown time. The smell of blood and viscera was unbearable, almost making her vomit, a dense, nauseating mix of putrefaction and metal that hung in the air. Her eyes scanned the scene with horror, and then she saw her mate, Kaya, lay motionless on the damp ground, his body mutilated, a dark pool of blood spreading around him like a macabre, indelible stain, a bloody tribute. Her offspring clung to each other, crying softly, their small bodies covered in blood and dirt, trembling with terror, yet miraculously alive, a thread of hope amidst the desolation. And among them, hovering over Kaya's body like a vulture in a gesture of macabre triumph, was the creature. It was even more terrifying in the daylight, its misshapen, grotesque form revealing itself in hideous detail. Its skin was gray and wrinkled, with bony protrusions that seemed to writhe beneath the surface, giving it an alien appearance. Its eyes were a dull red, lifeless, and long, sharp claws adorned its hands and feet, dripping a dark, viscous liquid. Its mouth, devoid of lips, revealed rows of irregular, pointed teeth, an incarnate nightmare that seemed to have crawled from the depths of hell to terrorize her existence and place, there to impede evolution, to destroy any progress of her species, to annihilate the very germ of humanity. Lyra had no time to decipher the nature of the stone or the significance of those strange images. The creature outside was testing the rock, the sound of claws scratching the rough surface echoing in the cave. A sound of growing frustration and fury, and the trembling in her body indicated it was growing impatient, its rage. escalating with each passing second. At any moment, the passage might give way. She needed to get out, but not before the creature moved away, or she would just be another victim to join the bodies in the clearing. Patience and strategy were her only weapons now, her only chance of survival. With a final glance at the bone with its enigmatic engravings and the glowing stone, an object that seemed to hold the key to an ancient secret, Lyra carefully put them into a small leather pouch she used to collect fruits, edible insects, and seeds. Her paw still ached intensely, a constant torment radiating through her body. But adrenaline and urgency propelled her, overcoming the physical pain and the paralyzing fear that tried to dominate her. She crawled back through the narrow crevice, peering out cautiously, her eyes searching for any sign of the creature, any shadow that might indicate its presence. The creature was not there. A momentary chilling relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a fresh wave of apprehension and distrust. Where was it? That thing didn't seem like the type to give up so easily. It seemed to have a relentless, unshakable purpose. Lyra moved with extreme caution through the ravine, her eyes and ears alert, her senses sharpened by the constant threat that hung over her. Suddenly, a sound. Her companions were there, huddled, wounded, some dead, their bodies twisted in unnatural positions, their lives cruelly and senselessly cut short. Lyra snarled, a savage, primitive sound born of pain, loss, and the purest hatred she had ever felt in her life. One of Lyra's offspring let out a cry of terror and staggered, stumbling over the body of one of the dead adults. The smell of blood and death hung heavy in the clearing, mingling with the scent of fear and the putrid odor of the creature, creating a suffocating and oppressive atmosphere, a nightmare stench. Lyra struggled to rise, the pain in her paw burning like fire, radiating throughout her body. But hatred and determination were stronger flames, propelling her, giving her the strength to continue. Her offspring, scared and wounded, huddled together, trembling with terror, yet their eyes fixed on their mother, seeking protection and hope, a flicker of faith amidst the horror. She lunged towards the creature, not to attack directly, but to distract it, and advanced, its sharp claws extended, ready for the final attack, for the coup de grace. Lyra did not hesitate. In despair, and then with a final intense flash that momentarily blinded Lyra, its body began to disintegrate. She had survived. Lyra looked at the bone she had thrown at the creature, now gone. And then she touched her pouch, feeling the small emerald green stone pulsing within, a source of energy and mystery, a secret to be guarded. She knew the creature was not a common predator, but something that sought to annihilate evolution, to erase the path her species was about to tread, to prevent Homo habilis from taking the next step, from becoming what it was destined to be. The bones, with their engravings, were more than simple tools. They were fragments of a map, of knowledge that nature itself guarded, an ancestral legacy that had to be protected. Her offspring were safe, but at a terrible cost. Kea was gone, and the image of his mutilated body would be an eternal wound in her soul, a scar of pain and loss. She felt a sharp ache in her chest, a pain that came not from her wounded body, but from her broken heart, from grief. Not into flesh and bone, nor blood and viscera, but into particles of light that dissipated into the air like smoke, leaving only a smell of ozone, a metallic, electrical odor, and the vacuum of its absence. In seconds, nothing remained but the forest air. The lingering scent of earth life in the forest continued its relentless cycle, and the pain in her heart would be an eternal scar, a constant reminder of that fateful day. But now, Lyra had a purpose, a secret that could not be forgotten, a legacy to be protected. That macabre encounter, the loss of her pack, and the truth revealed by the bones in the stone, all of it had transformed her forever. She was no longer just a female Homo habilis walking on all fours. She was a guardian, a witness, a bearer of knowledge that could shape the future of her species, a pioneer at the dawn of humanity. She gazed towards the horizon, where the sunlight promised a new day. And in her eyes was a dark determination, a promise that the lost link would never be completely forgotten. That day, 3.4 million years ago, was not just a day of terror, but the day when the future of humanity, in some way, was forged in the shadows by the hands and courage of a female Homo habilis. And perhaps, just perhaps, the creature she had destroyed was only one of many, and the threat still lurked. And what else lay hidden in the depths of that remote past? What other dark secrets did evolution hold, waiting to be revealed in the next chapters of humanity's story? And blood, and the deafening silence that followed the disappearance of that abomination, a silence that seemed to scream louder than any sound. She threw herself to the side, slipping in the wet, muddy earth, and with a guttural cry, a sound that blended pain and determination, she hurled both bones, hers and Kaya's, into the luminous aperture in the creature's chest, from which the pale, cold light emanated. The bones hit the precise spot with a surprising impact, almost a crack of lightning, followed by a searing roar of pain from the creature, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of reality. She ran in circles, limping from the pain that tormented her with every step, and terrifying intensity, and the creature staggered backward, its claws raking the air in despair, its form contorting in agony. A distorted sound, almost an electronic lament, a noise that belonged to no known animal, echoed from its mouth, laden with agony and despair, like the wail of a dying being. The creature's hunched body began to tremble uncontrollably, and its gray skin seemed to crack in several places, revealing a reddish glow beneath, like incandescent embers, as if it were disintegrating from the inside out. Lyra crawled backward, pulling her offspring close, shielding them with her lean but resilient body, a living shield. But with surprising speed, making the creature spin around, confused and irritated by its prey's unexpected agility. While the creature was disoriented, Lyra, with a quick and precise movement, picked up the bone that lay near Kaya's body, an almost ritualistic gesture. She felt the same energy she had felt in her own bone, the same mysterious vibration, an inexplicable connection that seemed to flow from one to the other. The creature, its dull red eyes fixed on Lyra, seemed to assess its prey like an experienced hunter who, however, underestimates the fury and cunning of a desperate mother protecting her children, the most potent force in the wild world. Lyra knew she could not defeat that thing by brute force. The creature was larger, stronger, and somehow seemed to be made of a different material, something more resilient than flesh and bone, almost invulnerable, an aberration of nature. But Lyra possessed something the creature didn't seem to understand, something it had underestimated. Intelligence and cunning, the beginning of reasoning ability, the seed of human inventiveness. Her species, though still in its infancy, already showed the first signs of what would become human sagacity, the ability to manipulate the environment and use tools, to think beyond pure instinct. She knew the fight would not be about physical strength, but about the mind, about the ability to outwit the predator through intelligence. She looked at the bone the creature seemed to have dropped beside Kaya's body. It was identical to hers, the same shape, the same enigmatic engravings that seemed to tell a secret story. It was irrefutable proof that the creature was not hunting for food. It was not a common predator, but rather a hunter of fragments of ancient knowledge, guarded by her own species for what seemed like millennia a hidden truth. The stone in her pouch pulsed with a faint warmth, visions of evolution, upright walking, complex tools, and future cities danced in her mind, a future the creature wanted to prevent. That creature did not want the lives of her kind. It wanted to annihilate progress, to prevent the future, to erase the path her species was about to tread, to extinguish the very germ of humanity. Lyra let out a defiant cry, a wild, primal sound that echoed through the forest, cutting through the deathly silence of the clearing, a cry that came from her soul and from deep despair, but also from courage. The creature, frustrated by Lyra's maneuver, let out a sharp, shrill snarl, a sound that chilled the spine. The light in its chest began to flicker frantically. With increasing, the creature let out one last cry of agony, an indescribable mix of pain, rage. Lyra, gasping and exhausted, watched the scene with wide eyes filled with incomprehension and relief. A weight lifted from her shoulders, yet a new responsibility settling upon her. The sun now shone intensely through the tree canopy, casting golden rays of light upon the blood-stained clearing, as if trying to purify the horror that had occurred there. A new dawn. Lyra stood, staggering, her offspring clinging to her, seeking comfort and security in her body.